one. Hello, Mary Jacobson. Nice to have you on the show. My sister from another mother.
Right, Papa Sisters. Thank you so much for having me.
Dude, it's a pleasure. I'm so excited to have you on the show because, I listened to your chat with Charles from Charles Miller Brand Denim the other day because, and it was such a great chat. And I also chat to, Jeremy, your boss, the Standard and Strange family, from the Standard and Strange family. And I would really like to continue the conversation I had with Jeremy with you because you are kind of spearheading a new, activist kind of direction for Standard and Strange. And, I really wanted to open up with this because, it caused a little bit of backlash, from a small group of customers, in your community. And basically for those out there who don't, know what we're talking about, so Standard and Strange are a beautiful retailer based out in Oakland. And, you're a men's retailer. You retail beautiful denim, leather, things that have been made by artisans. Also beautiful jerseys and knitwear, things that have been made the old way. And, I guess, if you can just kind of give us a little rundown of okay, why it was important for you and the brand and the company to go down a more voice more political, a more political dialogue, and, what kind of backlash that has and how this kind of new direction has kind of, created new meaning for you.
Yeah. I think that right now, especially in the United States, we're in such a unique, political time that it's really reverberated beyond a lot of what I've experienced in my lifetime, where, especially with the death of the murder of George Floyd a couple months back, there was such a political uprising throughout the United States. And I think that it really created a level of awareness about systemic racism within our country, and then the ways in which, individuals like me might even uphold some of these things that are causing inequality in our society. And I think there's been a real call to reckoning for every individual to look within themselves and to really see the ways in which they might be aiding and abetting white supremacy, or in the ways they might be dismantling it. And I've always been really conscious of my space within Standard and Strange, as a woman and as somebody who is of color. And it's been very apparent to me that there's a very default demographic that a lot of the heritage community will either showcase or maybe even sometimes cater to. And so that's always been something that's been very apparent to me as someone who felt like an outsider coming in and experiencing levels of discomfort at times, sometimes perceiving other people's level of discomfort. And so I felt that it was really our responsibility as an Americana driven shop in Oakland, especially, which is a historically very active Black community. I was we definitely have to contribute in some way and be really conscious of our place within our environment. And it's really difficult, I think, when you really start to look at it. It's how do we accomplish that? It's not an easy thing that you can just turn on a switch, because a lot of these things are very systemic. But I think that as a shop, we've really been looking at ways in which we can be more inclusive, we can be more welcoming, and also support not only our community, but communities at large that are marginalized across the U.S. And it's definitely been something that I think that at this point, politically in the U.S., that there is a strong level of a demand to accountability. And I think that as a shop, we're very lucky because, you know, we're all a group of like tightly knit individuals who can like safely share our views with each other and like debate things. But I also think that we've been incredibly lucky just overall, because it's a lot harder to do that when you don't have the support of, you know, your workplace or your environment. So it's been an interesting journey so far. I definitely think that it's something that as I read more, as I look into it more, as I talk to more people, I feel like there's so much work to be done. And there's just, there's a lot ahead.
Yeah. I just want to name, like, you were kind of, you know, politely dancing around, you know, the kind of demographic that would be, the Americana scene. Like I've, you know, I'm not going to lie, like, okay, I've just looked at this, like, over the time that I've been doing, the short time that I've been doing my podcast, I've been interviewing mainly like friends in the industry and like, you know, voices that I really admire and respect in the industry. They've all been, Caucasian men. Okay. So, but the ironic thing is, and I'm not sure if it's true for your customer base, but I definitely think it's true for the Standard and Strange team, is that, okay, they're predominantly Caucasian men, but these are super left-leaning men, actually super open-minded left-leaning men. You know, I want to just like kind of name that, you know, for people who are not involved in this scene, people who are outsiders, if you just kind of look in and judge a book by its cover, you would just basically assume that Americana, people who love Americana probably embrace like traditional 40s and 50s values, and therefore like, you know, all the, you know, the baggage that comes with that. And B, you know, they're all Caucasian men. So let's assume that they have a very conservative worldview. But to be honest, like, I have not come across that at all. Like, they're, you know, coming across a conservative person in this industry is actually quite a rare thing. So it's interesting. And I love when things kind of evolve and create a new meaning, you know. And I think the Americana scene definitely has like evolved and turned into a kind of we've kind of dragged this old idea into our context today and given it our own meaning, like, you know. So it's interesting. And I think, you know, that's how we evolve as a culture. You know, that's how we, you know, if things just stayed stagnant and stayed constant and never changed, everything would die. So I think, yeah, it's interesting. You want to say something right now?
Yeah, no, that is, I just have so many things to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, I mentioned when I talked to Charles, like I worked in vintage prior to working at Standard and Strange, and my initial thought about like, you know, possibly entering in this sector of fashion was like, I felt very uncomfortable because I had a lot of those same initial feelings where, like, you know, you go on a lot of these brand pages, like all their staff is white males, their models are all white males. I'm like, what is this world like projecting? But I think that what you say is very true in a way that, like, I've met some very progressive people, very politically active-minded people. And I think that it just reminds me of, like, one of my friends who is here in Oakland who dresses very, like, straight Ivy, like very preppy, very, you know, like tennis style. But he's like a huge punk and just like completely against, you know, like, you know, like dangerous hierarchies, etc. But it's like he dresses like in a way that I feel like a lot of people wouldn't be able to reconcile. But I think that fashion is so layered in a way where there's so many different levels to expression. And I think that can definitely get dangerous at a certain level. Like, I think a lot about, I've been thinking a lot about Japan and the back and forth of imagery and the consumption of popular culture, and just how some, frankly, negative imagery from like the US, for example, is still pretty popular in Japan. Like, for example, like Confederate flag imagery.
Oh,
right?
heavy.
So that's like a layer of like, you know, I personally, like, I've been grappling with that too, because there's a level of lack of context in Japan for things like that. But I also, like, personally, from my context, I don't see it as acceptable. So there's layers here when interpreting history, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it gets a little closer to like the danger zone. But even, for example, we got an email a while back about we were releasing some new Eastman camo items, and we got an email about somebody who was really upset because they were saying how they were, like, you know, a child of the Vietnam War, and how they were so opposed to war, and how could we possibly sell these things. And I thought that was such an interesting, I haven't encountered that kind of questioning in a while working at the shop, but that is something that I feel like I encountered a little bit more previously when working more on the floor with customers directly. And it's so funny because I'm now in this context where I'm so far removed from like that interpretation, but it's still like, it's interesting to me that somebody out there might react surface level to these things, right? Because I think that's something to pay attention to as well.
I'm going to be honest, like, I definitely felt like, you know, before I started my brand, and actually that's something I'm constantly thinking about, is like how I think it's, I think it's dangerous to romanticize war. And I think sometimes brands do that unknowingly because they're not asking themselves the right questions. And I think a lot has to do with how, our generation, and maybe, I feel like definitely I can only speak for my generation. Like, we didn't learn history thoroughly at school. We barely touched on a lot of important history. And therefore, when you have like a whole generation who like barely learned about the disaster and the horror of war and the aftermath of war, then you have this kind of, yet you're not asking yourself the right questions, and that you don't have the right motivations of doing stuff. And I think that the menswear industry, you know, it does draw a lot of inspiration from military gear, and rightly so, because, you know, whenever there was war and whenever there was big technological advancement in, you know, in gear, in you know, how things are made, it did come from war, because governments had big budgets to fund this kind of research. But I think, like, conceptually, it's always something I've struggled with a lot of brands, is why are they, you know, what is their motivation behind using these, like, these camos, and these, like, are they romanticizing war and fighting? Yeah. And that is up to each brand, I guess.
Yeah, or even when it comes down to, you know, reproduction versus reinterpretation, I think that there's a lot of liberties that can be taken. I think that in some ways you can't really have contemporary clothing as we know it, without military innovation. You're totally right. There's so much that we owe to military innovation, however you want to judge that. But I definitely think that that's something that I've responded to with like women's wear whenever I've looked at, like, you know, the collection, you know, synopsis, or like, you know, the manifesto. There's always like a very strong intention in terms of another core value that you're going off of. It's not like, oh, look at these guys look so cool while they were wearing this, you know, that's all that I care about. There's more of like a deeper resonance in terms of like the actual like context, and maybe even like emotion going into it. So I feel like that.
Go ahead. Oh yeah, I just wanted to quickly say, I feel like maybe that comes from being a new generation, a younger person doing this. And I definitely see this with Gen Z, like really young kids today. I think they're a generation that wants more than just, this looks cool. Like they're really like empathetic generation, and I think I have high hopes for Gen Z, actually. And it's weird
Oh,
because, yeah.
yeah, definitely. I think that it's been really interesting. I mean, like one of the more interesting things for me too has been like, as we, at Standard and Strange, we've been really trying to use our platform more to speak up on issues, to, take our time to actually put in some work towards these important issues. And what's been interesting is we've been actually getting some like critique about, like not doing enough, which I actually find as like really valuable, because there are so many different, this is a complex issue when it comes to like being conscientious as a human being in the world, I think. And especially right now with so many, like, especially in the US, there's so many like high stakes, high tension things that are really amping up the volume. But I think that really it starts with just starting to learn how to use your voice a little bit, and just also trusting in, because that's something that has really helped me in my time in this industry, is just really trusting my voice and learning how to trust that if I'm feeling a certain way, there's probably other people who will echo my emotions. And just because it has been hard at times, feeling a little bit isolated, because, like as a shop, we're the only shop like in Oakland really, and there isn't much of a direct sense of community, as if I'm thinking as compared to if you were like in Tokyo with like all the different shops where, there's tons of like-minded people just right around you. So sometimes I would feel very isolated, and just, especially when I was the only woman working at Standard and Strange, I always felt very hesitant to voice some of my feelings there. But as I really learned to recognize and value that, it's kind of come outward for me, in terms of where I'm like, it's not just about making sure that someone like me feels comfortable. It's making sure that, anybody approaching into our shop gets a little bit more of an understanding of where we're coming from, instead of that like initial, like, oh, there's a lot of white guys here feeling, which, some people unfortunately do get. Which, by the way, I find it really ironic, because I feel like there's so many powerful female players, and like so many powerful like players who are of color, and it's just I don't find that that's representative really at all of like the people I actually talk to, and the vendors I work with. So I feel like there's a real mismatch between like the projected audience and then the real audience, and who's really involved.
I think, like I keep thinking of that old saying, never but judge a book by its cover, because I think like it's so outdated to be judging people based on, their race and like what lane they're in, what identity group they come from. Because like, I'd like to think that we all judge each other by our own consciousness. So like, I'd rather judge someone by how they think and how they reason and how they question, rather than just like what they look like, what kind of things they're into, because we've become such a diversified, globalized society worldwide that, everyone has their own personal reasons for liking something, and you can't quickly jump on a negative reasoning for like why that person might like something, like I think like identity politics is something that's really, in the forefront of news and of the political dialogue today, especially in America. And, America's been so divided. It's become so polarized and divided that something like wearing a mask has become a source of like people getting angry at each other for. So, for me, coming from, watching all this from Bangkok, a completely different world, where we wouldn't think twice about starting an argument with someone for not wearing a mask or wearing a mask, that, it's a whole new world. And I just feel like people, if anything, I just want to stress to people, you cannot judge a book by its cover. And I think you and I like can totally relate to that, because we probably have a similar, we've probably encountered similar things having grown up, like as, you know, Eurasian, people, like who probably look a little more Caucasian than Asian. And like, we probably have similar experiences, like in both the Western world and in Asian countries, where we are always misjudged automatically. So I feel like, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's just the things. I think I've been actually talking to I've been bonding with a lot of people of, you know, who are mixed with Asian and white or with anything else. And it's just been so interesting because there's such a common bond in the feeling of the lack of relating to your, the lack of feeling whole in your identity. And I feel like that's actually the one common ground among people who are mixed, is that you will actually feel more connected to others who are of that similar experience, because neither one of your like parents, for example, has your experience. And I've been finding it really interesting, because I do think that it's been a big part of the way that I see the world. For example, like just how you're saying with the masks, it's so many people here are the mask issue. It's like most people aren't happy about it. Like the fact that people are like going crazy and they won't wear a mask, but it's not like we're, like you said, like in areas where mask wearing is really common as like a polite practice, it's like completely abhorrent to think that people would not participate, right? And that's been adding to my like sense of frustration, because I have that added context of like knowing that there's a different way to be. And it's been pretty mind-blowing for me, especially throughout the pandemic, because I just want to go to Japan. But I can't do that right now. I'm like, oh, I wish it was like sounds a little less scary over there.
Yeah.
People actually cooperate.
I feel like I just keep coming, like this has been this theme that I keep feeling drawn to since the start of the pandemic, but always, you know, beforehand, I've always been interested in this idea of like the common good. And like, you know, when we have a divided society, there are no common goals, and there's no common morality amongst each other to like, you know, do the right thing because it's right, not because it is a political statement, or it is, you know, I'm identifying with this particular group. It's like we are all humans. We all need to exist together, and we all want the best for our future and for the kids and the kids, you know, so what can we do together to make this work out? And it's like, I feel like just watching these crazy viral videos of people arguing in the street in such an aggressive kind of, really aggressive, nasty way. And it just hurts my soul to see this kind of behavior when, you know, it's like we're all struggling together. It's not like there are people in society that have no hardship, you know. So it's like, I think that's what is so different between where I am in Thailand and where you are in America, is like this collective goal, this kind of morality that everybody shares, and people, you know, people treat each other with respect and with good value, with moral values. I think like, so I've been reading this book by Jonathan Sachs. It's called Morality. And I've brought it up a couple of times in the last week, because I really think that it hits on this idea that in the 60s, there was a huge cultural shift in morality. That was kind of, the kind of shift, the fall of religion, and the focus from the collective we to the I, the me society. And what happened was morality was outsourced to politics and to corporation. And so we decided that it was kind of, that was as a me-centric society, we decided that was kind of where we were headed. But there were so many crazy, implications that happened, as a result. And that's kind of where we're at today, is this really divided, political situation. And I just want people to take care of each other. That's, to me, goodness exists in all people and in all aspects in every corner of the universe. And we need to use that good energy to share amongst each other.
I think that brings up a lot for me. I think that, at least where I stand right now in the U.S., I feel like it's the division and the disconnect with politics, because, politics and our current regime has a huge effect on our society in some really critical ways, but there's such a disconnect between the feeling of being able to do something about that. And that's been really contributing to a large feeling of dystopia, and I think also a lack of agency for a lot of people. That's something where I've personally been struggling a little bit I feel like it's been a conscious battle of trying to negate that, because it is a very strong presence that I perceive. And so I think part of with trying to be a little bit more politically active and trying to push the shop to be more politically aware as well, it's been a way for me to combat those feelings of that divide and of that helplessness, where it doesn't feel like the power is necessarily with the individual right now. But then I think that there are a lot of meaningful ways in society that you can connect to others and contribute, independent of politics or anything like that. So I think that right now, really reclaiming things that you can do directly to, foster a sense of community is really crucial, because right now it's been pretty terrifying. But at the same time, I think that the human spirit that's been rising up has been really resilient. And I've seen a lot more of a collective, let's all get through this together than I expected in a way. So I am encouraged by that.
That's really good, that's a really high vibe thing to see, forming, this collective, we're all in this together. And so going back to not judging a book by its cover, I wanted to ask you, so what did draw you initially to Americana and Americana, products made in that light?
Yeah, absolutely. It really started with, I was working at a vintage shop previous to Standard and Strange, where I was a buyer, and I was just, processing bags and bags of clothing every day. And it was pretty routine. You see mostly the same things, but I started to become completely attracted to anything that was, older than 60s, and especially menswear, because I would basically be operating solely on touch. I would, pick up something, be like, okay, let's touch it first. And then you just kind of see how it's made and you just take it from there. But I was just noticing, as you're constantly scanning for quality, I was like, menswear is just consistently higher. And then also all of the older vintage, I was like, this is all incredible stuff, especially if it was, a vintage 40s item in great condition is going to be a incredible substance. And so that started to get me more interested in denim specifically, because I started to realize, there's a lot of different types out there and there's a lot of different levels. And then also just menswear in general, because I was really attracted to the level of intentional detail too. Especially when you start finding historical garments where you're like, why does it have a funky pocket like that? And then you look it up and then there's a cool backstory. And then it's much more exciting than why does this woman's jean have a pocket that's this shallow? And so that really started to lead me down a path of being interested in shops more locally in my area. So there's Self-Edge and, Standard and Strange, where I first fell in love with Capital, where I walked in and there was a raincoat, and I was just first really interested in the Capital, the cloth tag.
Yeah.
Because you know how like the white tag, and then it has in
The
italics, it
red.
says capital red.
Yeah.
And I just so immediately attracted to the tag. I was like, this is a beautiful tag and a beautiful garment. And I was just like so enthralled by it. I thought it was like a vintage. I was like, this can't possibly be vintage, but the way it's executed, I was interested. And so I started to get like horribly obsessed with capital, and then it stopped. It all started there. But I really did start from a pure attraction, I would say. I do have I think a lot of my background kind of forced me towards that. Like, this is something that's silly, but here in the US, we had like a doll series called American Girl Doll. And they're like these dolls that are maybe like this big. And back in the day, they were like historically themed. And my doll was it was the World War II themed one. So it came with all these like it came with like a dickie, like a wartime, like, because people would wear dickies instead of shirts and like all these things. And I became so fascinated with World War II from then. And so I think that once the dots started connecting and I was like, oh my gosh, like all of these things that I was into, and then especially moving towards getting into military clothing, it all just started to click for me, where I was like, this is all something that really makes sense to me. And it's something that I just find on a purely technical level also just really interesting.
Yeah.
Like once you getting into like development of certain technologies, it's fascinating. Like I really like zippers, and just like looking at the technology over the years, it's just something that's, I think it's on par with anything like, you know, like cars or motorcycles, things like that, where there's so much depth to it that you can really, I think it is something that is accessible.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And there are plenty of people super obsessed with all those details in like, you know,
I mean,
like,
it's like, yeah, like Gary Eastman with like, he can just write about A2s, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's like for any given subject, there's so much.
Yeah. I think it was super interesting. I just had this sort of like when you were talking about working in the vintage shop and the difference in detail between men's and women's pieces and how you were drawn to pieces like older than the 60s. It made me think, you know, actually like the difference was that usually women made their own clothes at home, like back in those times, and like workwear that was made in a factory was for men. Like, I mean, it wasn't until like World War II when women came into like the labor force, because all the men were out at war, and women needed to do their part on the home front, you know. So you had like in the UK, you had like the Women's Land Army where they were all doing farming and growing crops. And then you had women coming into the factories, and that's when they were starting to wear all the workwear and those wonderful pieces. Like, and I think that's kind of interesting. Like, I think that's always fascinated me when that cross in World War II, when that cross did happen, that cultural shift did happen. And like, I think it says a lot for where women are today. And I think like that's been my fascination about, workwear and how men's gear was always made with much more intention and much more functionality, because just purely because they were the ones doing all the work. But now as a woman today, we have such different, we have such different meaning and we have such different roles in society that we're really kind of carving out a new culture. Like, you know, women haven't had the roles in society as we do today. You know, before World War II, that was just unheard of. And in the space of time, you know, of like humankind, you know, that's like a speck of sand on a timeline of, you know, so there are so many implications of where this is going. And I think we have been dealing with the teething problems of that for the past, you know, many decades. So like, yeah, I find it really interesting when I meet other women who are really fascinated by vintage and this area. Like for you, like, does that, does that cross-pollination give you any kind of different meaning? Like, what do you kind of want for this? What direction do you want for this industry to go in?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think that there's a lot I would like to see. I think that first and foremost, I think that there's a general woe of representation. I think that the level of representation needs to be a lot more deliberate moving forward with just like across the board in general. I think that there needs to be more voices heard from people who are involved who may not be like the dominant face of behind certain operations, businesses, shops, etc. I think that in general there needs to be more of a celebration of like the actual audience that we have here, not just like a perceived audience or a projected audience. So I would really like to see not only like showcasing all sorts of different people in terms of like, models, like campaigns, things like that, but also just really listening to what people want. I think just, especially when it comes to the women's wear sector, it gets very murky. And I think that there's a lot of projection happening without actually understanding what people want. And I think that people are really sick of that. People are sick of feeling like they're being pandered to with like, where there's a men's brand and then they have a women's line that is of noticeably lower quality, for example. I think that people are really starting to not want to take that. I think that one thing that a lot of brands and shops can do is just really seriously listen to feedback moving forward. Like, for example, like with our shop, we've been getting all sorts of feedback, especially like politically. And some of it is just, like racist people wanting to rant. But some of it is really critical and legitimate too. And I think that we've only started to get that kind of criticism because we've opened up our platform a little bit more. And I think that's really important because people aren't going to, generally speaking, I'm not the kind of person where I like find a brand and I'm like, oh, they might be doing something I don't agree with and just message them about it. If there's more of like an active conversation and it's not, because the internet isn't very conducive, first of all, for, communicating these sort of things. But I think that if as a company, brands or shops, et cetera, can kind of show that they're more for the people, I think that there's only good that can come from that. Because, as a brand, I think that, moral responsibility is a really tough argument. Or it's like, are you responsible as a shop or as a brand to be political or to be part of, like eco-conscious? There's so many different things out there. And I think that's a very complicated debate. But just me personally, and from what I've seen, I think that maybe it might be a big jump for some people to like be like explicitly political, but at least to focus on inclusivity is really important right now, I think.
Yeah.
So I think be conscious.
Yeah. Being conscious. I feel like in my perfect world, in my utopia, I would want all businesses, all individuals to do the right thing at their best capacity. Full stop. Like, is that so hard? And
I think it can be hard.
Yeah, I know, right? And it's especially hard at scale. So when you have, when you expand and you grow into such a huge scale where every small aspect of the operations are compartmentalized, then it gets really hard because then you have communication issues and things get broken down too small, which is what I think is the problem of mass scale anything. But yeah, like in my perfect world, I'm a big fan of the economist called Robert Reich, and he wrote this awesome book called Saving Capitalism, and he's got a really strong political voice right now. He has a YouTube channel, and yeah, he's always making awesome content. But he observed that back in the 80s, 70s and 80s, and it transitioned in the 90s, but back then small business, there were enough small businesses to kind of counterbalance this corporation, basically the effect of corporation on our economy. Now, our economy is about people. It's not about money. It's about people, and it's about how you treat people and it's about community, really. And so back then, there were enough small businesses. There was enough thriving diversity of small business to countervail corporation. But nowadays, that balance is completely, tipped towards corporation. But in my perfect world, it would, we would be able to support a diverse range of small businesses. Life would become so much more interesting because there would be so many. Yeah. And if you think about Japan, like you go to any, city in Japan, and there'll be this like tiny bar that can seat like 4 or 5 people. And they're like playing dope music, and like the guy behind the bar who owns the bar, he like loves his job. And you go, how do these people survive? Like in most other countries, you wouldn't be able to open a random super niche bar that like plays a really niche specific time period of reggae or whatever, and like be able to survive. But that is what makes life so interesting, so that's my hope.
What's so interesting to me is like those shops, like those in Japan that you're talking about, which I'm instantly filled with joy just thinking about.
Yeah.
Like, I'm thinking about a curry place in Yokohama that we've gone to like on buying trips, where it's like tropical themed and like it seats like 3 people, and we got curry at like maybe 11 in the morning, and some people came in after us, and they were like, you still have curry? And he was out already. He's like, no more curry for the day. But what's crazy to me is, so I was actually talking to Jeremy about how does this business stay open if he's a curry shop and his lunch curry is out at like 11 a.m., And Jeremy was like, well, like, for a lot of people in Japan, the salaryman life is so crushing that people would rather like have their small bar and, play their like niche reggae and like just make minimal money, but just, exist on their own terms.
Yeah.
And I think that's so interesting too, because I think that that's such a great example of like that stark contrast to like the corporate life where, in Japan, people literally, there's karoshi, which is like when people die at work, right? Because people just don't take care of themselves and they work so hard, and people karoshi all the time.
Which is like mind blowing to think about, like death from work.
It's literally karoshi is like too much work, death. And it's like, it's not something that should be a thing. And so it makes sense. You're like, I totally get why I feel like I too would much rather be making my curry than, working. I don't even know how the average work week is in Japan, but
how do you work to death? Like that would be some serious hours and serious lack of sleep. I guess you can die really quickly from lack of sleep.
I think it mostly is with really high pressure professionals like surgeons or like lawyers and things. So like people who spend like multiple nights at the office, for example, or like, they don't go home and they don't eat for like a week straight or something. But yeah, it sounds insane, but the human spirit is really, it has to be nurtured. You can't just work all the time. And I think that there's definitely a dangerous tipping point right now where that's like, people have forgotten, I think, especially right now in the US, it's especially terrifying, but it's like, how can you live like a a thriving life as a part of a society when there's so many pressures to, you know, just make a living or to just get through times. And I really do hope, I'm very scared for the state of U.S. manufacturing and U.S. Small retail, because right now it's going to be a huge challenge for shops to stay open.
Yeah.
Even here in Oakland, it's been really heartbreaking to see what small businesses have been going out of business. Like, we had this amazing small shop that only sold magazines. Like, they had, like, you know, zines and like indie publications and all this, and they were around for like 13 years, and then the pandemic just shut them down.
Man.
And so I think that that's definitely been hard to swallow. And I think I'm really just trying to root for the small businesses and shop small moving forward, because, you know, I think it'll take a while to rebuild till we can get back to the point where we'll have that again. Yeah,
absolutely. One thing a positive thing that I've seen is that consumers, I mean, I guess from my customers have been really making a huge effort to support, you know, what they believe in. And also like publications as well, have been, you know, doing their best to share things of people who are doing things right. And that gives me a lot of hope and positivity. But yeah, like I sent out our, you know, I'm doing our wholesale campaign right now for Spring Summer 21. I sent out, you know, on our mailing list, like, you know, the new season stuff. And like, as soon as I sent that out, like there were like 20 or 30 emails that came back, like automatic replies to say, I'm no longer working for this brand or company anymore, or there are stores like who've been in business 10, 20, 30 years who've been like, we are permanently closed, which is like really heavy. Yeah.
Because it's not just, you know, that cool shop on the corner. It's like, you know, the people who work there, that was like their love and energy, you know, and it's definitely, I've been trying to balance. I think hope is definitely a difficult emotion, or I don't know if that's emotion, but it's been a tough thing for me to grapple with lately, because it has been a time where I'm like, it's time you have to take things really seriously right now, face the realities. And I think sometimes hope feels a little bit dissonant with that, because hope is like, oh, it'll get better, like things will.
Well, there's blind hope, and then there's
more, but there's nuance, right? I think that hope might not be the right word, but definitely we need optimism, and we need to, you know, really steel ourselves with the human spirit, and like you said, like take comfort in like the people who are supporting you, and to just really put yourself out there in ways that you can also give back and feel the optimism come back.
Well, on that note, we are just out of time, but we could have talked for hours and hours on this.
Time. Yeah,
you'll have to come back on the podcast again. For people who want to follow what you're doing and your awesome style and the awesome factories that you visit and the activism that you are radiating, how can they do that?
Yes, you can find me on Instagram. My handle is Shunga Cowgirl. It's very raunchy, I know. But you can also find me through Standard and Strange. You can email me at standardandstrange.com. And follow our activism. We post pretty often. And I also post links on my personal profile for what you can do for each week. Every Friday, I try to compile a list of, you know, active causes. Usually it's US based, but it's usually pretty comprehensive with a variety of things. So you can come join me as we try to keep our spirits up around here.
Yeah, keep that good vibe going. Thanks, Mari.
Thank you so much, Lauren.
Oh, pleasure. So, bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.